We come finally to the last section of our study, lesson number 18, as we continue studying the book of Genesis now from the last part of chapter 47, and then 48, 49, and 50. We have gone all the way from the creation of the world now to the death of Joseph. Joseph now dies at age 110, his father at age 147. We might be puzzled at first why he goes to bury his father right away when his father dies, but he says, you can wait with me when you go back up to the land of Egypt, then you can take my bones back with you at that point, and no further explanation is given. But in chapter 47, the scene shifts now from Joseph's own family to the troubles in the land of Egypt, and we're rather surprised by the way this turns out, that Joseph is also a very cunning and shrewd administrator, looking for whatever kind of advantage he can come up with. And at first the Egyptians in stages run out of money, and they say we're going to die, and then first of all they turn in all their cattle and their animals, and then they're still not able to raise their own grain, and so they finally sell themselves to the Pharaoh and sell their land to the Pharaoh. Notice how the clergy has a special role in this, where they do not have to give up their possessions as the other people had to. And there has also always been a tension between the religious leaders and the political leaders. We'll see that tension unfold in the later parts of the Old Testament with people like David, who has tension with those who are high priests for him, and others along the way. So there's always that little bit of tension, and because the religious people are supposedly a little bit closer to God, at least then, they would sort of give them special compensation and special rights, because they wouldn't want those priests to call down some sort of a curse on them from one of the many Egyptian deities. But as the people turn in their possessions and turn them over, we find the Pharaoh becoming absolutely the complete lord of the land. He owns all the land. It's sort of like he's playing the game of Monopoly, and he has won every property, and he allows the people just to keep on going around the board, or the game of Risk, where he's defeated everybody else's army. This is really a massive victory. We're told that by the time it's all done, the people keep 80%, and there would be a 20% tax, and all the land would belong to the Pharaoh. Of course, when different pharaohs come in, then all those rules change, but at least at this point, it says that that was a practice that went on for a long time. We go from that then to look at the settlement of the people of Joseph in the land, and first of all, some initial discussion about the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. As I mentioned in our last unit, the blessing and the word of a blessing has much more power to it than simply words that we might utter one to another. We might reflect here a little bit on the blessing of Aaron as the people of Israel left Mount Sinai. Those words are not just words, the Lord bless you and keep you, etc., that are sort of, well, okay, let's get up and get going, and might be in our worship services, it simply is kind of a hint, okay, we're just about done with everything, and children probably are real excited when they come to that point. But these blessings, these words, actually have a power. And we almost get the sense that the blessing is a prediction. It's sort of like unfolding, and chapter 49 is going to show this, an unfolding of what is to come. So it's in some ways maybe a self-fulfilling prophecy. The people who hear those words understand why the history unfolds as it does in the future. We might also be a little bit troubled. Are people not free to make their own future? Does God sort of lock people in? And in some ways, when we hear these blessings and these promises, it's sort of saying God's doing some of the steering and guiding of what is going to happen. But the undercurrent of that, and the other side of it, would be that he knows which tribes are going to be the ones that will most have the effect of leadership to protect his people, just as Joseph, the wise young man who is sold by his brothers, goes down into Egypt and then makes sure that everything goes well during this time of this famine. And the other little interesting sidelight is that Jacob blesses Ephraim, and he switches hands, and he should have put his right hand on the older son and his left hand on the younger son. He switches them, And even though he is blind, he says, my son, I know what I'm doing. This one is going to be powerful, but this one over here, this Ephraim, the youngest of his grandchildren now at this point, or the youngest because he brings Ephraim and Manasseh in, the youngest of his children would then be Ephraim. And he says, now the youngest by all counts, actually my grandson will be the one who will be very powerful. And that will go on, as I mentioned earlier, both in the land of Israel, or in the land of Egypt to some extent, and then for the first couple of 100 years after they do get into the land of Canaan and take over. Then we move to chapter 49, where we have the blessings of the different tribes. You'll note that not all the tribes get the same amount of ink. They don't get the same amount of space. Reuben is a very important tribe, and Judah is a very important tribe, and the tribes of Joseph are very important tribes, both Manasseh and Ephraim, and then Benjamin gets a little bit as well. But we find this, that it is not a completely balanced thing. We're really finding out who are the leaders in the future. Reuben there's a good bit of explanation why doesn't he rule, and the wickedness that he had done against his father was very significant. Simeon and Levi, we're going to know the tribe of Levi as the tribe of Moses later on. We will know that Aaron is the high priest, comes from the tribe of Levi, of course. But at this point, there is more of the sense of Levi as a warrior, and the events that take place at Shechem are brought up once again. The warrior, along with Simeon, who wipe out an entire people because of the rape of their sister Dinah. And you might remember the comment that was made, we're not going to let anybody do this to our sister without responding. Jacob does not necessarily want to see eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. There is always that tension when somebody says we don't have to go punish someone for every single thing they've done against us. And when nations try to make peace after they've been at war for a long time, there are many, many people who still want to keep on getting back at the other guy. Simeon never really does have a defined territory in the land. He's located kind of southwest along with Judah, and he's really settled down around where the Philistine territory is. Levi is sort of scattered all the way through the country, and he has cities that are all the way through the land. Later, and really this role of the one who carries the sword and the one who teaches is really not that much different. The teaching of the rules and the guidelines that Levi is to carry out go along with being the guard over the money in the temple, and the one who is to be responsible for the order within the land, and so they're scattered throughout it. But he will not have his own separate tribe. Judah then is praised, and there's a passage here which is often seen that is as a passage that will predict the coming of Jesus at a later time, when until Shiloh come in terms of one translation, and that's the gently flowing waters. There's a reference to that in the book of Isaiah. But the whole general tenor of that is Judah's affair with his daughter-in-law is not mentioned here, but there is an anticipation at some time that he will be the powerful leader, and that'll take place at the time of David already, when the tribe of Judah will replace the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin to a certain extent as well. That's described, if you ever get a chance to look at it, in the 78th Psalm. Psalm 78 gives a whole long historical background of events that took place, finally leading up to why did God choose David as the king rather than someone from the family of Ephraim or someone from the family of Benjamin. As we go on with some of the other blessings, they're really more simply saying, here's where this one is going to live, and here's what this one will be known for. So we have one who lives near ships, and one who is going to be doing farming but not be very good at it, and some who kind of just live near others. And so these three tribes, or four tribes if you want to take Ephraim and Manasseh separately, all of these tribes are highlighted to the exclusion of the others. And then we come to the point where Jacob dies. And he is 147 years old. He's lived for quite a while then in the land of Egypt, even after he gets down there. It's kind of sad that when he came before the Pharaoh, that he had made the comment, my days are few and full of trouble. Obviously, all of the events of the apparent death of his son Joseph had taken a toll on him, and he never quite felt like he recovered from that. But it's odd that somebody who would have lived over 100 years would say, "My days are few," and they quickly go by. And we hear every once in a while of people who live to this age. Very recently, I've seen notes about someone who lived supposedly to be 141 and 138 and 137, and not all of these are identifiable or provable. But that really is, in our living, probably the extent of it. There don't seem to be anybody talking much beyond that in terms of age, and many are going to die, of course, a lot sooner than that, as does Joseph, who dies at age 110. They embalm the body of Jacob, and they take him with much mourning, and 40 days of embalming, 70 days of mourning in Egypt. We can see that Joseph is a very, very important person by this time. The elected leaders go up along with Joseph when he goes to bury his father at that cave of Machpelah at Hebron, at Kiriath Arba, that is identified as the place where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and now Jacob's wife Leah is buried. Rachel is buried somewhere else near Bethlehem. Ramat Rachel is what that is called, but now he wants to be buried here with his older wife. We might find that a bit strange as well. One would think he would want to be buried with his beloved wife Rachel, or that he would have at some time moved her remains to this, but we're never told about that. He sleeps with his fathers. Very often in a burial cave, they simply either had all of the bones just kind of pushed to the back of a cave, or sometimes they would even take the skulls and kind of line them up, and the rest of the bones would be just kind of shoved to the back when they came in to do the next burial. Where the head is separate, they call that a disarticulated burial because of the word articula here in the back of the neck. Articulated burials are where that is still, where the whole skeleton is left together. But they would normally wait until the body had decayed, which could take months or even a few years, depending on the climate. But here it would have probably taken quite a bit longer with Jacob because of the fact that he had been embalmed and would have been treated like a mummy, and though they don't use that particular term. After the death of Jacob, then Joseph's brothers once again show that they are not sure that they can trust the word of forgiveness that Joseph has given. And it pains him now. Remember, they had come and bowed down to him, just like the dreams had said. And now it pains him that he has to tell them once again, "I forgive you." But it might be important for us to remember as well that forgiveness is never just a very quick thing. We continue, if we have sinned against someone, to have our thoughts and our minds go back to those events. Or if we have been sinned against, that our thoughts and our ideas go back to those events. And Joseph here reminds us that when forgiveness is done, then forgiveness is done. At the very end of the story now, then Joseph also dies, and he is buried with full rights in the land of Egypt. And we come to the end of Genesis. If you were to look historically, you would see that there is a gap of 400 years or so between the last page of Genesis 50 and Exodus 1. Exodus 1 to 3 will cover a period of about 80 years, the outcry, and then the birth of Moses, and then he has to take 40 years till he grows up and kills the Egyptian slave or taskmaster. Then another 40 years he's out in the wilderness. And then from Exodus chapter 3, really all the way to about chapter 18 or so, 17 somewhere in there, is maybe just a little bit over a year, year and a half or so. And from the Mount Sinai experience in about chapter 19 and 20 of Exodus, all the way through to about chapter 10 of Numbers, there will be a description of what happens at Mount Sinai. So there's a huge amount of material that takes place in its descriptive form in just a little over a year. And then as they leave in Numbers to go up into the land of Canaan, they at first are worried once again and are fearful, and then they don't see how God can bring them into the land. and then they spend the third 40 years of Moses' life out in the wilderness until at the end of Numbers they begin to make a few inroads, and they're able to attack those regions of Edom, though they go around Edom and they attack the land of Moab and the land of Ammon just east of the Jordan, and hear a final speech from Moses in the book of Deuteronomy just before he dies and before they go into the land. Of course, that's the subject for other stories, but that rounds out the kind of general overview of what we find in the books of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. They are really the story about how this people, numbering 70 at this point, become a huge mass of people that almost can't be numbered, and how they as a people are given further instructions about the covenant that began at that began in Ur of the Chaldees, and when they're at Mount Sinai, then they're told as a whole people that God will keep that promise. Obviously, there is a drumbeat of God saying, I'm going to be with you, but there are also many, many events that take place. There are certainly many people who probably know very little about God and the God who had brought them down there, and when they go out, then they need to be instructed once again. I thank those of you who have been involved this year once again in leadership. I have deeply appreciated the faithfulness that you have given to the task of bringing the study groups together. I thank all of you who have participated. It is a treat once again to be able to complete another study. This for me is the 99th episode. We have now as a group done 11 different studies of 9 weeks each, and so this is taping number 99, and we will look forward to picking up and doing some further study next year in the fall, and I hope that in the intervening time that you will be able to continue to grow and read and search the scriptures and act not only on those things which might come to mind at first, but act on those things which the Lord might be laying on your heart as you have a little bit more time now to care for others within our congregation and use the gifts that you have and care for people in your family and your community, and look at them as people who may be carrying those same burdens that Joseph's brothers did, and help them through word and deed to hear and experience the forgiveness and the love of God, a God who does continue to watch over all of us even when we might think that we've been abandoned, and promises to use us just like he used Joseph to bring blessings to other people. May we keep our eyes focused on that and live out these days of our life as days of good news. Thank you, and God continue to go with you.